Hello, everyone. It's Angela Priven here from Do It Yourself Health, and today I have a very special guest with me, Rebecca Coomes. She is a cookbook author and a SIBO survivor and thriver, and a big mentor and a podcaster. She's a wonderful podcast, and she's a big mentor in the SIBO community, providing really wonderful information about SIBO. And I have her here today so she can share her story with us. So Rebecca is one of those cases that has beat SIBO. And one of the problems with SIBO, as I see, is there's so much negative press about it. There's a lot of information already written about how tough it is and how the relapse rate is very significant. So I wanted to have a positive success story on to talk about what SIBO is and how she beat it. So thanks, Rebecca, for being here.
My pleasure. My pleasure, Angela. Great to be here.
You're usually the interviewer, but I'm going to interview you, and I would love to hear about your story, how it all started. And
sure.
Yeah.
So I was, it all started right at the start. I was a premature baby born 2 months early and had a pretty tough start in those early days. Both my mum and I were very sick, and our lives were really hanging on the line for a couple of days, which wasn't too much fun. So the doctors pumped me full of antibiotics, as they do, and then they put me onto formula and cow's milk, saying to my mum the wisdom of the late 70s, saying that breast milk was actually really bad for premature babies and that I had to be fed formula. So I had my very first food intolerance right from the get-go. I was highly allergic to dairy, and I wasn't coping well with formula. So I was a really sick kid, which led to more antibiotics. And then as I got older, I had a really weak immune system, so I got every single thing going, and therefore I got every antibiotic, and often really strong antibiotics as well. As a kid, I remember feeling kind of sick, particularly when I was eating foods. And I used to say to my mum, Mum, I just feel really yucky. And she'd say, well, what do you feel? And I'd say, oh, I just feel yucky. And I remember now that it was a lot of nausea, and, I was chronically constipated. Just some foods made me feel really sick, but when you're little, you can't articulate it very well. And Mum would take me to the doctors, and they'd look at me and they'd say, she's fine, there's nothing wrong with her. And so the cycle would continue. And then as I got into my early 20s, I was diagnosed with endometriosis, which is a condition which affects the endometrial lining of and the uterus. It's an autoimmune condition. And so I was told that I would need to have laparoscopy surgeries and laserings every 12 months because I needed to have the lesions removed from my abdominal cavity. So I commenced that process of having lots of abdominal surgeries. I also found a doctor who, I was living in the UK, in London at the time, and she was my first experience at a more holistic practitioner. And she said to me, and this is back in the early 2000s, she said, I don't know why, but my ladies often have much better endometriosis symptoms when they cut out gluten and dairy. And before we do your next laser surgery, I'd like you to go strictly gluten and dairy free for 3 months. And let's see what happens to your symptoms. And within days, I was feeling like a brand new person. Those energy slumps had stopped. I just felt so full of life and vitality, and it was really amazing. And then it was my first real connection, and this was when I was probably about 24, 25, that food had a big impact on how I felt. But as the years following that progressed, a lot of my symptoms returned. So those classic IBS type symptoms like bloating, again, I was still chronically constipated, lots of brain fog, exhaustion, big energy slumps, unexplained joint pain and all the rest. And so I would go to doctors saying, something's wrong, I just don't feel good. And they would either say, you've got irritable bowel syndrome, there's nothing we can do about it, live with it, it's just life. Or they would say, they'd run all these blood tests and they'd come back and say, your blood works are perfect, there's nothing wrong with you. Perhaps you're just a little bit over anxious and over stressed out, you silly little woman kind of message, which is really disheartening when you know that you feel really unwell and no one's taking you seriously. I returned to Australia and really began my quest in earnest to find what was wrong. And so I was actively looking for help and I wasn't finding it. And I'd try various diets. So I read about the blood type diet. So I followed the blood type diet for O blood group, and I'm an O negative blood type. And that made me feel better. But again, I still didn't feel great. There were still things causing me problems. And then I discovered the Whole30 and I did that. And again, I felt really good, but I didn't feel brilliant. There were still issues. I was still bloating, not as much, but I was still bloating. I was still constipated. I do, protein diets, and then I do sugar-free diets, and I do all of these things and still not find a solution. And one night when I was living in Melbourne, by this time, I was in desperation and I was on Google, good old Dr. Google, looking for answers. And I kept seeing a naturopath's name appearing, and I thought, I'm just going to go and see her wherever she is. And she happened to be only a 10-minute drive away from where I worked at the time. So I walked into her office, sat down, burst into tears and said, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I feel sick and no one believes me, and I really hope you can help. And the first thing she said to me, which was just so empowering and like a big warm hug, was, I believe you and we'll get to the bottom of it. And so we went through my history, we went through my symptoms, and she said, I actually think I know what you've got. I think you've got a condition called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. It's really easy to test for. We'll do a lactulose breath test. We'll have the results in a few weeks, and then we'll know. And sure enough, it came back that I had hydrogen dominant SIBO, and the relief I felt at having an answer finally was overwhelming. And then my naturopath and I really worked as a team to get me well again. And knowing that I had her complete belief in me and I had support and that I was working with somebody that really knew what they were doing, she's excellent when it comes to SIBO, was so wonderful after years and years and years of not having that help. And what's really great is today I am free from SIBO. I have a lot of underlying risk factors to have it redevelop, which I'm now addressing, and we'll probably talk a little bit about that. I just say at the moment I'm SIBO free. And the good thing is now is that if it returns, if those bacteria end up going back into large numbers in my small intestine, I now know what it is and I know what to do about it. And so it doesn't scare me, which is really great, because I feel really empowered about this condition that I could quite likely redevelop. But at the same time that I was diagnosed with SIBO, I was also diagnosed with hemochromatosis, which is a condition where I've got a genetic mutation where my body doesn't think I'm absorbing enough iron, so my iron levels are actually really high. And my GP, my doctor, was quite concerned about how high my levels had got. 6 months later, when I'd cleared my SIBO, I went back in for a new blood test to test the ferritin saturation, and it was actually back in a normal range. And my endometriosis has calmed down significantly, and I haven't had to have another surgery on it. So not only have I really worked on healing the health of my gut, but these other conditions that I have also improved significantly, which is a really lovely side effect that I wasn't expecting. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. I actually am an O negative as well. I know we're both really rare.
Yeah, we are. We're the universal donor.
Yeah. So what I wanted to ask you is, how long have you been SIBO free, and what was your treatment like?
So I got the all clear in June of 2015. So I'm coming up to 2 years, which is really nice. I decided that I wanted to do a herbal approach because I had taken so many antibiotics. I didn't want to do more antibiotics. I've now learned a lot more about the antibiotic treatment therapy, and I probably wouldn't be as adverse to it as I was originally. Back then, I didn't know anything about it, and I was just like flat out, no way. But the herbs worked really well for me. So my naturopath and I just rotated herbs over a 6-month period. So we'd do generally 2 herbs at a time, plus a prokinetic, which would help the motility of my gut, because that was obviously a major issue for me, given that I had chronic constipation. So the movement in my gut just wasn't working as well as it should. And so we'd do would go through the round of the herbs, and then once I'd finished that, I'd go back in to see her, and we'd swap it to another herb, and we'd do a round of that, or 2 herbs, and I'd finish them up, and then we'd move to another herb, and we'd do a round of that. All the while looking at my symptoms. So as my symptoms changed and lessened and then ultimately disappeared, my naturopath would change the herbs depending on my current state. And then we retested at the 6-month mark, and it came back that I had no more SIBO, which was really wonderful. Alongside that, I followed the biphasic diet by Dr. Narala Jacobi, who's Australia's leading SIBO specialist, and is actually who I ended up, I followed her protocol to write my cookbooks in the end. And I really enjoyed that diet because I found it very easy to follow. It's pretty rigid in the sense that you follow one group of foods initially, you move into a broader group of foods next, and then an even more broad group of foods at the final phase. And for me, that was great. It worked well. I knew what I could and couldn't eat, and I just worked around it. So, and the great thing about the diet was it gave me symptomatic relief pretty quickly. So the bloating was gone very quickly, which was a huge relief after years and years of pretty painful and very visible bloating. And with the prokinetic and the diet, within about 2 weeks, I was going to the toilet every day, and that was it was literally a miracle. I was singing hallelujah on the toilet every day. Because you don't realize how good going to the toilet feels when you start doing it, because you've never done it. It just was like, this is incredible. So that was my treatment plan, and for me, that worked really well.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I wanted to also talk to you. I mean, there is a diet and supplements, and they're very important, like SIBO. However, I know that you have also some lifestyle pillars that you talk about, and I wanted to talk about those because SIBO is a life-changing, and IBS, SIBO and IBS is a life-changing condition in terms of, I always say it's here to teach you a lesson. It's here to help you grow and sort of take stock of your life and examine what's not working for you.
Mm-hmm.
And you have these 5 pillars that really outline all the areas that you can examine. So I'd love for you to talk about those 5 areas and, how you basically employed those areas in your healing.
Sure. They really developed as I went through my treatment, because I realized that getting through something like SIBO would take a lot more than literally just taking herbal antibiotics. I was going to need to address the entire realm of my life if I really wanted to get back to optimal health. And I'm on a continuous path towards optimal health. Even today, my health is significantly better than it was, but I don't see that there's ever an end point. There's no line in the sand that you cross and go, woohoo, I made it. I think you're just constantly working on it. So the first of the 5 key pillars to health is awareness. And why I started with awareness was that I realized that I needed to stop and reconnect with my body. I needed to become aware of how I was feeling. And I hadn't realized how clear the clear signals that my body had been sending me were until I stopped and started listening. Every single symptom that we get is a message from our body going, hey, you out there, take note. But we're so used to masking them with either pain medication or antacids. We don't have the same kind of advertisements on our TVs like you guys do in the States for pharmaceutical medication. And whenever I come to the States, I'm sitting in Los Angeles at the moment, I'm always quite horrified at how prevalent the advertisements are around, do you have heartburn? Take this tablet. Or do you have IBS? Take this tablet. With all these messages that if you take our tablet, it will go away instantly. We have it to a much lesser extent in Australia, but there's still messaging that says, pop a pill and you will feel better. And so as a society, as a Western society, we're used to masking our symptoms. It's actually really powerful to start listening and reconnecting. And when you do that, then you can be very in tune with what your body is saying. So it's a really great way to know whether foods are helping or harming you, whether stress is having an impact on you. So with that first step, I stopped and started really listening to my body in all aspects. And I realized that I had been in a really stressful, unhappy job with, I had a manager that I didn't like and she didn't like me. And I just didn't feel fulfilled. And so I actually quit and I went out on my own and set up my own marketing consultancy. And the impact that had was immediate. I just felt such relief. I felt excited that I was in control of my own future and my destiny, and that I was able to do things my way. So I took an enormous amount of stress out of my life. I then started listening to my body around, the food that I was eating and really checking in with, well, when I eat this, I feel like that. Oh, okay. Right, I get it. Bloating now made sense to me because I could see the direct correlation of what was happening with my body. So once I felt like I'd kind of got awareness under control, I moved into the nutrition piece. And nutrition is so important in all aspects of health because nutrition is our life source. The quality of the food that we eat directly impacts our body. So if we're eating really good quality fuel, then our body and our cells has a much greater chance of being a healthy, happy body. Whereas if we're eating a lot of processed food, or if we're eating just cheap and nasty food, or we're eating, say, if we choose to eat meat and we're eating animals that have been really intensively farmed, that they themselves have had a poor life, they've been flooded full of antibiotics and growth hormones, then that's having an impact on us. So I took stock and I looked at all of the food that I was eating, and I decided to start consciously making a decision to eat pasture-fed and raised animals, that I would really avoid where possible. And I'm sure there are times that I've eaten it without knowing it, perhaps in a restaurant, but when I get to choose the meat that I eat, that I choose the most humanely raised animals, and also reducing the quantity of meat and increasing the quality of my vegetables, and choosing organic where possible. It's not always possible to eat everything organic, but I do like to try and do that as much as possible. And also just being really mindful of how I was eating. So not only having good quality nutrition, but making time to eat and eat well. So I have been in the past a speed eater, sitting at my desk at work like, I don't have time for eating, just smashing down a lunch and getting on with it. And I didn't know this at the time, but I just intuitively felt it, that if I ate in a really stressed and anxious state, that wasn't helping my digestive system. And what I now know was that I was keeping that fight or flight mechanism on, which really impacts the quality of digestion. And so what I did was again, I'm in the early stages of my SIBO journey, and I thought, right, I'm going to set aside half an hour to just sit and eat. And I was lucky enough to be working from home at that time, so I could go into the kitchen and make a proper meal. But I would sit down, turn all electronic devices off, look at my food, take some breaths in before I even started eating. And then I'd start visualizing. I'd look at the food and I'd be like, oh, that food is giving me the best quality nutrition I need right now to get well. And I'd kind of visualize it going in my mouth and then into my stomach and my digestive system, and all of the nutrients kind of spreading out to my body where I needed it most. And it really helped. And I slowed down. I started chewing my food for longer, putting my knife and fork down between every single mouthful so that I couldn't eat quickly. Really had to teach myself to slow down. And that made a really big difference. And if there is now ever an occasion if I have to eat something quickly, I really dislike it because I've trained myself to go back to eating slowly, whereas that was my norm previously. The third piece was around movement. So I'm an all or nothing kind of person. I'm either training for triathlons or I'm lying like a sloth on the couch. And when you're chronically unwell with something like SIBO, it's really easy to get out of a routine of exercise. And I had got to that state. I was really weak. I was, feeling stiff and sore, partly because of SIBO, partly because I was just unfit. And I went and sought the services of a personal trainer because I knew myself. I am great when I make a commitment to somebody else. I can be pretty crappy when I make a commitment to myself, and then I can find all the excuses under the sun as to why I don't need to get up and exercise. And I went and saw this lovely guy, Sean, and said, look, I'm really weak and I'm chronically ill and I'm in a really bad way, so I can't do really intense exercise. I actually need you to just hold me accountable and to keep me coming training. I just need to start slowly. And he said, I'm happy to work with you. And I still work with him today, which is really great. And so really slowly, we just started building up what I could do. There was no heavy intensity. It was just gentle stuff. And particularly for people with SIBO, this chronic illness is quite inflammatory to the body. So often doing high intensity workouts can be extra inflammatory for our bodies. And even though we think we've got to go for a run or we should go and do CrossFit, if we're not in the right state physically and in our whole bodies in a health way, then we can actually be putting more stress into the body. So pulling back can sometimes be really beneficial. And today I do a lot of walking. I normally do yoga. I've got a back injury at the moment, which I've recently discovered, which is a bit of a pain. So I've had to put my yoga on hold, but it's much slower and calmer exercise rather than really stressing my body out. And the fourth pillar is around mindset. So what we think is what we become. And I had been chronically sick my entire life. So I identified as a sick person. And my partner said to me when I sort of first got diagnosed, he said, sometimes you wear your sickness like a badge of honor. And he said, I don't know that that's really good for you. And I was quite offended by that initially because I was like, how dare he? How dare he? I'm sick. Doesn't he know that I'm sick, kind of thing? Oops, you're out. But it was the best thing he could say because I thought, hang on a second. If I'm projecting that image to people that I'm sick, what am I doing internally? So I really had to make a plan of how to think positively towards health. So I would start to look for the small positives in a day. And it might have been that I didn't bloat till 3 p.m., whereas before it was 9 a.m. that I started bloating. Or if I couldn't see anything positive with my health that day, I'd look outside and I'd say, I can see the sky today. Or I just saw a bird fly past and it was really cute. Or I just saw this dog and I got to pat it and it was lovely. And I have what I call my happiness jar. And I now, on little sticky notes, I will write something that's really positive for the day, just to help me get myself out of my own way. And all these little steps that I did have resulted in huge change because now I identify as a well person. And that is really powerful because I believe that I'm well, it really supports my body staying well. And then I also started employing practices like meditation, which I wanted to do for a long time, but I just did not know where to start with that. So I downloaded some apps and I also found some meditation podcasts, which I find really beneficial because I think I'm much better at a guided meditation than trying to figure it out on my own. And I just started with that. And I've got to be honest, I don't do it every day, but I do it regularly. And that helps just calm the mind and helps give me focus as well. And then the fifth piece is around lifestyle. So I also recognized that there were a lot of things that needed to change in my life in order to start living for health. One of them was sleep. I was getting to bed way too late. I'm a natural night owl. And then working for yourself and working from home meant that I could be working till 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning and then getting up after only a few hours sleep and doing it all over again, sitting at my desk for long hours and not getting up and moving, and it was quite unhealthy. So I started setting, I've got an alarm that goes off on my phone at 10 p.m. every night that says it's time to wind down for bed. And my goal now is to be in bed before midnight. And one day I'll get it to being in bed before 11. I'm pretty good most of the time. There are some times when I'm like, it's 11, it's like 12:30, I've got to go to bed. But, it's a work in progress. Stress, which I talked about, and I'd addressed in terms of my work, and work was my major stressor. I had to look at my relationships. So my partner and I were having a pretty tough time. Me going through SIBO was really tough. It was really tough on our relationship. I was very insular. I was looking within a lot, and I was very focused on myself. And in fact, he and I ended up having a break for about 9 months as we needed to go and take some time away from each other, and I needed to go and focus on what I needed to do before we could come back together. But I also had to look at friendships. Who was in my circle that was supporting me to get healthy, and who didn't ultimately want me healthy? Now, I'd been a pretty big drinker and partier, and I hadn't been living a lifestyle that was supportive to health. And so when I stopped drinking, and these days I have the occasional drink, but I don't drink like I used to. I'll have a glass of wine or two with a meal, but that's kind of it. Whereas I used to go out on the weekends and get quite drunk. And when I stopped doing that, I had a lot of friends say to me, I liked the old you. The old you was fun. The drunk Beck was a fun Beck to be around, but sober Beck, you're a bit boring. So I had to go and find, I had to go and lean into friends that were more in my wavelength and step back from certain friends. And that was tough. I'll tell you that was really hard. And it's still hard at times. I still miss some of those friendships. But at the end of the day, I have to remember my 84-year-old self is going to thank me today, what I'm doing today, for everything. They're not going to be pleased. My 84-year-old self, if I stayed in that lifestyle that wasn't supportive, is going to be really cross at me and wished that I'd done something about it. And then, there was just all the other things. So, making sure that I was applying everything else that I've talked about in my 4 pillars, so good food, and setting myself up to make sure that I was going to the market to get the good food, making time in my diary to do that. Making the time in my diary to exercise, so that my whole lifestyle was supporting my overall wellness goals. And that was to feel great again. Not just good, but I wanted to be able to get out of bed in the morning and wake up and literally spring out of bed and feel great. And I am there most days now, which is really wonderful. And it's put all of that work that I've done, it's made it all the worthwhile, and all the sacrifices I've made to make that a possibility, because today's Rebecca, looking back at 2 years ago, Rebecca is really grateful for what I did. So they're my 5 key pillars to health.
Thank you so much for sharing so openly and honestly about your journey. And what we've learned from you today is that not only is SIBO beatable, or at least symptom relief is possible, but this is not just a take a pill process. This is very much a holistic process of looking at your whole life and figuring out how you can make it work better to support you and your health. So thank you for sharing that and bringing that point home. It's something I truly believe in myself. And I'm actually putting your pillars to work in my own life too,
Wonderful.
Awareness especially.
Yeah, that's great.
Also fast eater.
Yep.
Like it's a race, so eating slow is definitely been my practice. So
yeah, and it takes time. And I guess my final parting message is, this has been a 2.5-year journey for me, and I'm still working on everything. I wouldn't say that I've nailed all of my 5 key pillars necessarily. I still have to work on it every day, but it's small incremental change. So just small steps. You can't change everything in your life. I was 36. No, what was I? 37 when I got the SIBO diagnosis. I'd had 37 years of doing things the way I had done them. I couldn't change them overnight. So, anyone watching this interview today, just pick one thing that you'd like to focus on first and work on that, and then move to the next thing, and then the next thing. And in 2.5 years' time, you'll find that you've made some big changes without even really seeing them happen, not like if you tried to do them all at once.
Thank you so much. I think a lot of people find your story very inspiring. And if you can tell people, if they want to learn more about the work you do, how to reach you, and what's going on in your world.
Sure. Well, my platform is The Healthy Gut, and the website is thehealthygut.co, so .co, and that's a place really dedicated to the SIBO patient. So you can come onto the website and you can read articles. I've got the Healthy Gut podcast as well, which features interviews with leading specialists from all around the world, and it's really I'm dedicated to bringing greater information and education to us with SIBO so that we can learn more about our condition. And I've also launched the SIBO coaching program, which is a program designed for people with SIBO who want to learn how to apply the 5 key pillars to health to their journey, and really to know that they're working with someone that totally gets it, because I've been there and I've done it. So, you know, I've been in the trenches and I know exactly what it feels like. But I love hearing from people, so people can also drop me an email at rebecca@thehealthygut.co. It's always great to connect with people.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Rebecca. And
my pleasure.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.
See you later.